A small piece of wood, no longer than 6 inches, carved with precision along one side, lightly beveled, so smooth it looks polished. It seems like nothing, but that piece of wood is holding a 130-pound log suspended in the air. It's the one that will decide whether the animal lives or dies. Not the weight of the log, not the size of the trap, not how experienced the trapper is. It's that 2-millimeter notch, that polished surface, that calculated geometry. That's what separates a trap that works from one that does absolutely nothing. That is the heart of any high-impact trap. Not the force it stores, but the mechanism that releases it. And when you understand that, when you stop looking at the log and start looking at the trigger, the way you think about catching an animal changes completely. This video is not about 3 traps. It's about 3 different ways of thinking. The deadfall has existed longer than any written record of hunting. It probably grew out of the same instinct that made the first hunter lift a stone and realize that if it fell at the right moment, the work would be done. The principle is so simple it sounds crude. Something heavy, suspended, an unstable trigger, an animal that doesn't see the danger coming. But reducing the deadfall to that is like reducing a bow to a stick with string. The mechanism is simple. The engineering required to make it work reliably, with real animals in real conditions, is anything but. To understand what makes a deadfall functional, you need to understand what it's exploiting in the animal's behavior. The deadfall doesn't catch an animal that's running away. It catches an animal that's moving towards something it wants. It is, fundamentally, a trap of attraction. And that changes everything about how it needs to be built. The log itself doesn't need to be massive. A log 7 to 8 feet long and roughly 5 to 6 inches in diameter is enough for most medium-sized game. What matters is that it's heavy enough to strike fast and hard when it falls, and light enough that the trigger mechanism can hold it without collapsing prematurely. A log that's too heavy puts excessive strain on the support system and can trip on its own during a strong gust of wind. A log that's too light hits without enough force to make a clean capture. Construction begins with the pen. A rough enclosure of heavy branches, open at the front, channels the animal toward a single point of entry. That pen is not decorative. It's functional. Without it, the animal can approach the bait from any angle, and the deadfall requires a specific line of entry to work. The open front of the pen is where the log will fall. 2 stout stakes driven into the ground on either side of that opening serve as guides. The log rises and falls freely between them, without drifting. The trigger system is where most of the intellectual work happens. There are several configurations. The most common use is a supporting crotch stick driven into the ground on which one side of the suspended log rests. A second stick, the actual trigger, is positioned horizontally across the opening of the pen, roughly 10 inches from the ground. When the animal enters and presses that stick with its own body weight, the system collapses immediately. The crotch loses its point of balance, the log drops, and the animal is struck across the back or the neck. Trigger sensitivity is where beginning trappers make mistakes most often. A system set too tight, where the components are locked in too firmly, requires more pressure than the animal will naturally apply as it moves through. A system set too loose trips with the wind, with a bird, with any peripheral disturbance. The ideal point is where the log is held at minimum balance, where any added force, no matter how small, is enough to start the collapse. The best way to test this is to press the trigger lightly with a stick after setting the structure. If it falls with a barely perceptible touch, it's right. If it takes real pressure, it's set too tight. A second log placed on the ground directly below the fall line serves as a base, ensuring the heavy log doesn't sink into soft earth when it drops, which would reduce the impact and could compromise the capture. Now pause for a moment. Before moving to the next trap, there's a question most people never ask. What is the animal experiencing as it approaches? Not in any sentimental sense, in a technical one. An animal approaching bait is in a state of active alertness. Every sense is sharp. Any element that falls outside the immediate environment's normal pattern, a wrong scent, a shadow that shouldn't be there, a sound that doesn't belong, is enough to make it turn back. A trapper who built a mechanically flawless deadfall can lose the capture entirely if they left human scent on the branches of the pen, if they snapped twigs in a way that exposes the white wood beneath the bark, if they disturb the ground in a way that doesn't match what the environment naturally does. The perfect trap in the trapper's mind may be perfectly visible to the animal. And that's why setting a deadfall requires a kind of patience that has nothing to do with waiting. It has to do with working slowly, collecting the pen branches from places well away from the trap area to avoid creating local disturbance, using fallen branches whenever possible, breaking nothing close to the site, driving the pen stakes carefully without tearing chunks of earth, touching the log with strips of bark or thin branches when needed, avoiding direct hand contact. None of those gestures is superstition. It's signal reduction. But there is a limit to what a deadfall can do. And that limit has a name: animals that learn. A bear that has encountered a deadfall once, or that has simply observed one in neighboring territory, begins to recognize that configuration of suspended wood above a stick enclosure. It can recognize the pattern without ever having been caught by it. The intelligence of large predators is frequently underestimated because we associate intelligence almost exclusively with abstract thought. And animals don't think in abstractions the way humans do. But they recognize patterns with an efficiency that is genuinely unsettling. And this is exactly where the deadfall reaches its limit. It's visible. The fall mechanism, however well disguised, alters the landscape in a way that an experienced predator will notice. There's a structure there that shouldn't be. There's a suspended weight casting an unfamiliar shadow. There's a forced entry that makes no sense in terms of how that environment naturally organizes itself. The bow trap solves a completely different problem. It doesn't assume the animal will move to a specific position and press a trigger with its body. It assumes the animal will introduce part of its body, usually the neck or head, into a defined space while reaching for something on the other side. And when it does that, the trap fires before the animal can react. The construction of the bow trap is radically different from the deadfall. It starts with a wooden board roughly 2 feet long and 5 or 6 inches wide. In that board, about 9 inches from one end, a square opening is cut, at least 4 inches across, wide enough for the neck of a medium-sized animal to pass through with some clearance. Along the upper edge of that opening, a row of stout tin teeth is firmly tacked in, pointing inward. On the opposite edge, a few inches below the opening, a small circular hole is bored and then polished on the inside with as much precision as possible. The bow is fixed just below the opposite edge from the teeth, secured with wire staples passed through holes in the board. The bow should be made of firm, seasoned wood. Hickory, oak, or ash work well, about 4 feet in length. The bowstring is then drawn. The arrow is loaded with its metal point passing through the circular hole in the board, and the retention system is set. The retention mechanism is where the most care is required. A small wooden plug, beveled along nearly its entire length on one side, is inserted into the circular hole in a way that holds the arrow's tip under the pressure of the drawn bow. That plug is connected to a bait stick of about 6 inches, what the animal will touch when it reaches for the food positioned on the inside. When the bait stick moves, the plug shifts, the arrow is released by the bow, and the shot happens before the animal can respond to any change in its environment. The fundamental difference between the deadfall and the bow trap isn't just mechanical. It's about speed and about positioning. The deadfall acts when the animal is inside the pen, standing on the ground trigger. The bow trap acts the moment any part of the animal's body crosses a plane defined by the board. And it acts at a speed that the deadfall, which depends on gravity, simply cannot match. The fox is the animal that illustrates better than any other why choosing the right trap matters as much as building it correctly. Reynard, as old trappers called the fox, with a familiarity that was equal parts respect and frustration, is an animal whose cunning regularly exceeds what a trapper expects. Catching a fox with any trap is work that demands patience above everything else, but catching one with a deadfall demands something more. An irresistible bait, precisely positioned in territory the fox already considers its own. There is a case that stayed in the memory of trappers across rural New England. A fox had been making repeated nightly raids on a poultry yard, and the damage was growing with each visit. The deadfall was set not at the edge of the woods, where the fox might detect it before committing to the approach, but inside the yard itself, at a point where the animal had already shown a consistent pattern of entry. The bait chosen was a live duck, tied inside the stick pen. Not a piece of duck. A live duck. One that moved, that made noise, that created the illusion of easy prey. The fox didn't come to investigate bait placed there by a human. It came to hunt something it already knew was there. When it pushed its head under the suspended log to reach the duck, it displaced the trigger system. The log fell across the neck. The capture was clean. That's not luck. That's the architecture of choice. The trapper didn't just build a trap. He created a situation in which the fox's natural behavior would carry it directly to the point of capture. The bait wasn't placed to attract a hungry animal in general. It was placed to exploit a specific behavior that specific animal had already demonstrated in that specific territory. That is what separates an experienced trapper from a beginner. The beginner asks how to build the trap. The experienced one asks what this animal does and then builds the trap around the answer. The gun trap represents an entirely different philosophy. If the deadfall is a philosophy of controlled gravitational force, and the bow trap is a philosophy of stored kinetic energy released at speed, the gun trap is a philosophy of delegation. The trapper doesn't need to be present. The gun will be. And when the animal arrives, whatever the hour, whatever the weather, the gun will act. That has enormous practical implications for the trapper who works large territory, or in conditions where frequent human presence would compromise the effectiveness of every other method. Construction begins with selecting the weapon. A rifle or long-barreled shotgun loaded with shot appropriate to the size of the game. The stock is lashed firmly to a tree or to a stout forked post driven into the ground, and the barrel is secured similarly. The whole assembly must be completely immovable. The gun should be positioned roughly 3 feet from the ground, aimed at a specific point, not into open space, but toward a nearby tree, so that any projectile that passes through the animal and continues will stop there and not travel in any direction where a passing stranger might appear. That precaution is not optional. It is part of what defines a trapper who understands what he's doing. The gun trap's trigger system exists in a few variations, but the principle is the same. A series of sticks connected to the trigger that transmit the animal's movement directly to the firing mechanism. The most common arrangement uses a small sapling 1 to 2 feet long, with a diameter just snug enough to fit inside the trigger guard without releasing the hammer. That stick is supported by a forked branch driven into the ground. A second, longer sapling runs from the muzzle of the gun back to the tip of the first stick, with a hook or projecting branch stub at one end. The bait is secured firmly to that hook, a piece of carcass preferably, especially if the target is a predator that has established the habit of returning to a meal. The puma, for instance, never abandons the carcass of a kill until it is completely consumed. Finding the remains of a puma's prey in territory where the animal's presence has been confirmed is, in practical terms, the same as having already found the trap site. The remaining carcass is the natural attractant. The gun trap is positioned near it, not directly over it, far enough that the animal has to move toward the weapon when investigating the food. When the animal pulls at the bait, a movement that is instinctive, one it won't hesitate to make when the smell of food is present, the longer sapling is dragged forward. That acts on the shorter stick, which shifts out of the trigger guard, which releases the hammer. The shot fires. The animal is directly in the line of aim. If more than one gun is used, 2 or 3 rifles angled toward the same point, like the spokes of a wheel converging at the hub, the chance of a single insufficient shot becomes marginal. Even large animals like bears and lynx have been taken with this method, though it's most commonly set for predators that operate across wide territory, and whose pattern of returning to carcasses is well established. One important note: the percussion cap, the cartridge, whichever applies to the weapon, must always be the last element added. The entire system should be assembled and tested multiple times without live ammunition to confirm that the sticks transmit movement with the right sensitivity. And only after all verification is complete should the weapon be loaded and the hammer set. That sequence is not excessive caution. It's the procedure that separates the trapper from the accident. If you feel that this kind of practical knowledge still matters in the world we live in, that it's worth preserving, understanding, and passing on, this channel will keep exploring techniques that very few people still know at this level of detail. Stay with it. What comes next is worth your time. There's a comfortable fallacy about traps that deserves to be confronted directly. The fallacy goes like this: animals are creatures of pure instinct, and those instincts can be exploited in predictable ways by any trapper who knows the basic principles. Learn the rules, apply the rules, catch the animal. Simple as that. The reality that any trapper with genuine field experience will confirm is something else. Animals like the puma, the Canada lynx, the fox, and the wolf possess a capacity for behavioral learning that goes well beyond what most people are willing to accept. It's not that they think, in the human sense of the word. It's that they update their behavioral patterns based on past experience with an efficiency so high that, in practice, the result is indistinguishable from an intelligent predator adapting its strategy. A trap that works in territory where an animal has never been caught can fail completely in territory where similar traps have already been used. A lynx that escaped a deadfall will not approach another structure with that same configuration of suspended log above a stick enclosure. It may even recognize variations of that pattern that the trapper considers sufficiently different. The associative memory of certain predators is far more durable than seems reasonable to assume. This doesn't mean traps don't work. It means they work best against animals that haven't encountered them before, and that effectiveness diminishes in territories where trapping has been practiced intensively. A virgin territory and a worked territory call for different approaches, not just different configurations, but different philosophies of capture. The bow trap, for instance, holds a specific advantage in this context. It looks radically different from any deadfall or drop trap. The vertical board with its central opening doesn't evoke the pattern of suspended log above stick pen that an experienced predator may have learned to recognize. It represents something new in the animal's repertoire of patterns, and the time it takes for that animal to learn to avoid the new pattern is precisely the window in which the bow trap is most effective. That cycle, introduction of a new trap, a period of high effectiveness, gradual recognition by surviving animals, the need for variation, is one of the least discussed principles in trapping, and one of the most important for anyone who works the same territory over years. But here's where the logic inverts in an unexpected way. A trapper who has mastered all three traps, deadfall, bow trap, gun trap, might be tempted to think that the solution to a difficult animal is to try all three in sequence until one works. First attempt with the deadfall. Failed. Switch to the bow trap. Failed. Set the gun trap. Capture. It sounds logical. In practice, it's one of the most costly mistakes a trapper can make. Every trap that fails and is detected by the animal, whether it approached and turned back, whether it found the structure without triggering it, whether it witnessed the mechanism indirectly, is a lesson the animal will carry. You're not just failing to make a capture. You're training the animal across a wider range of threats to recognize and avoid. A trapper who sets 3 failed traps in sequence in the same territory may create an animal that will be essentially uncatchable in that area for a long time. The animal doesn't know it's being hunted in any abstract sense, but it knows, through behavioral pattern reinforced by repeated experience, that that specific area is dangerous and should be avoided. The choice of trap, therefore, is not a technical decision about which mechanism is the most sophisticated. It's a strategic decision about which mechanism has the best chance of working with that specific animal, in that specific territory, at that specific moment. And making that choice requires something no trapping manual can fully provide: direct observation of the animal's actual behavior in the field before any trap is set. Knowing the 3 traps does not guarantee success. Knowing the animal is what makes the traps relevant, and that's why the moment before any trap is set is paradoxically more important than the setting itself. Before any log is suspended, before any bow is drawn, before any gun is lashed to its support, there is a period of observation that cannot be shortened. Tracks that reveal a pattern of movement. Marks on tree trunks that define a territory. Feeding remains that indicate habit, the direction from which the animal typically approaches, the hour when that approach happens, the alternate routes it uses when the main route is disturbed. That observation doesn't happen in a day. It happens over several days, in silence, without interference, without leaving any sign of human presence that might alter the animal's behavior before the trap is ready. The trap that will work is the one designed around the behavior the trapper actually observed, not the behavior he assumed the animal would have. Somewhere right now, in a stretch of woods you will never visit, there is a deadfall set and waiting. The log is suspended. The trigger is at minimum balance. The bait is inside the pen. The trapper left before dawn and won't return until tomorrow. The forest is quiet. There are tracks that lead to the edge of the pen and stop. What remains to be seen is whether the next pass will be the one that completes the story, or the beginning of a variation that will call for a different trap, in a different place, with a different reading of what that animal has learned and what it still doesn't know. That waiting is not passive. It's the most demanding work of everything described here.